Barbara Slavin. Our next call, Los Angeles.
Hello. I'd like to say that the coming war with Iran will be for Israel, just as Walt and Mearsheimer have described in their excellent book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. Why don't we take a look at Israel's 200 to 400 nuclear bombs? I mean, if I was Iran, I'd want to have nuclear weapons as well to offset the threat by Israel. And why aren't we talking about the USS Liberty attack cover-up by Israel? I mean, the Chicago Tribune had an excellent article. A friend of mine, Captain Ward Boston, was mentioned in it. He said that the USS Liberty attack by Israel, which killed 34 Americans and wounded 172, was covered up to the highest level of the President Johnson regime. Why isn't the pro-Israel biased media, with the exception of that excellent piece in the Tribune, covering this as well? Except here we are, securing the realm for Israel again. The bottom line to Iran is Iran supports the resistance in Lebanon, the Hezbollah, and Hamas against Israel.
Thank you, caller.
Well, you raise a very important subject. Clearly, the Israelis are very, very concerned about Iran and its nuclear program, and clearly this program is more of a threat to Israel probably than it is to anyone else. The United States is an ally of Israel, has supported Israel in a number of different ways, and shares Israel's evaluation of Iran. It's not just Israel. The U.S. concern about Iran with a nuclear capability is that this sort of Iran would be able to throw its weight around throughout the region, would destabilize even further governments in Lebanon, possibly try to stir up the Shiites in eastern Saudi Arabia, where the oil is, Shiite majority in Bahrain, large Shiite populations throughout the Gulf. And there's just a concern that it would make Iran really a regional superpower, and that Iran would not be operating in a way that would favor U.S. interests. U.S. interest is defined by a long line of U.S. presidents to include security for Israel. If you have a problem with that, you have a problem with U.S. policy going back a long time.
Yes, hello, and thank you for C-SPAN. I've often thought that attacking Iraq was like throwing gas on the fire. I think the bombing Iran would be like throwing a couple howitzer shells on the fire. Not to mention it'd be economic suicide.
On attacking Iran, yeah, I agree with you completely. The price of oil would go over $100 a barrel. We'd all be paying $4 or $5 a gallon for gas. The Shiite populations in Iraq and all around the region would rise up against the U.S. And we might even see something that we've never seen before, which is Iranian-backed terrorism within the United States. And you have to understand the way that Iran has functioned is through proxy groups like Hezbollah and the militias in Iraq. There have not been, or there have been very, very few instances of direct U.S.-Iranian confrontation over the last 30 years, but that certainly would change if the United States were to attack. Now, U.S. alleges that Iran is developing a program that is meant for nuclear weapons, but there's no proof of that. There are no bombs. So you can imagine also the reaction in much of the developing world if the U.S. were to bomb a third Muslim country without concrete evidence that it had this sort of program, and without that country directly threatening the United States.
I wanted to ask something. You made a comment about if you have a problem with that, then you have a problem with a lot of our presidents. I happen to, I forget what triggered your comment. It was a questioner or a comment from a questioner. But we should all have problems with our presidents, certainly going back to President Eisenhower. We overthrew a democratically elected government of Iran, Mossadegh, and so I have a lot of problems with a lot of U.S. presidents. And
well, what I meant, the reference was to U.S. support for Israel, and that has been a policy of the U.S. government for a very long time. So what I meant by that, I have a lot of problems with a lot of presidents, I assure you, but what I meant by that is that has been U.S. policy, and you know, whether one wants to question that or not, that's up to the viewer or the listener. I wouldn't say that Iranian leaders loathe the U.S. At all, and I wouldn't say that most Shia do. I think there's actually a distinction there. One of the things I argue in my book is that U.S. policy has had the unfortunate effect of creating more enemies, unifying Islamic enemies against the United States. Iran was very ready to restore relations with the United States after 9/11. We had negotiations with the Iranians, which were secret from 2001 to 2003, which I describe in the book. The Iranians in 2003 made an offer for comprehensive negotiations on all the issues between our countries, including the nuclear issue, support for militant groups elsewhere in the region. And the U.S. rebuffed it. And this was when Mohammad Khatami was the president. This was before Ahmadinejad, when the Iranian nuclear program was not as advanced as it is now. So a lot of fault on the U.S. side for not taking up these overtures and seriously trying to reach agreements. And it's no worse than a lot of governments that the United States has good relations with. No more repressive than many regimes that we have good relations with, including China.
What I'm happy to hear is that someone like yourself is looking at Iranians as human beings, and as are all the Middle Eastern countries and every other person on this earth. And I think if the United States starts to treat people with dignity, we won't have so many enemies, and we need to talk to our enemies.
I agree.
You know, if Israel has a problem with Iran, it is not up to us to annihilate Iran. And if the neocons and Bush and the Jewish people want to annihilate Iran, then if you talk to 75% of Americans, we don't see it that way.
I disagree with the caller's analysis of the way policy is made in this country. I think first of all, when you speak about Jews, are you speaking about Jewish people as a whole, or are you speaking about the American Israel Public Affairs Committee? Because they're two different things, as I'm sure you know. I would venture a guess that the majority of Jews in the United States feel the way the majority of Americans feel, which is that they're not eager to get into another war, and they'd like to get out of the war that we're currently in Iraq. But there are pro-Israel groups, and they're not just Jewish. Many of them are Christian fundamentalists that believe in supporting the Israeli government no matter what it does and no matter what it wants. And these people are all upset and excited about Iran and are pushing hard for a confrontational stance.